Hi loves! Welcome to today's studio session. And this time I am sketching a stack of crumbly and appetizing chocolate chip cookies. In this video you'll see the full coloring process with all of the exact colors I'm using and all of my tricks and techniques for creating this crumbly and appetizing texture. If you want to sketch this illustration from start to finish, then real-time lesson with the initial sketch, color selection, and all of the explanation real-time is available on my Patreon page. Join me and my students and get everything you need in the lesson to achieve great results. Now let's talk about the materials I'm using today. My paper of choice for today is Bristol paper by Canson. The markers I'm using are alcohol markers Copic Sketch. For the initial sketch, I'm using a graphite pencil and a kneaded eraser, and for the soft highlights and textures, I'm using a white colored pencil by Caran-d'Ache Luminance. I'll leave all of the names of the brands in the description box as well. Now let's get back to the drawing. This reference picture drew my attention for several reasons. The first one is the composition. I am very inspired by food photography. This photo is cropped here because I left the central subject that I needed. And still, this is the great composition for the food illustration. I can see here one main object, which is cookie stack, and the additional objects that make the composition richer, and in this case, these are chocolate chips around the stack. The next thing that I like about this photo is the texture of the cookies, and to be more specific, the combination of textures. The most interesting texture for me in this object is crumbly texture of a cookie dough and that cracked surface. Plus, I like the combination of this crumbly texture with smooth and sometimes melted chocolate texture. This is something that I really wanted to render as an artist. That's why this reference picture turned out very interesting for me. Now you can see that I'm starting to add those textures, but before that, I've made the base layer. The main challenge for me in this illustration was to show that crumbly and uneven texture of the cookies. That's why from the very beginning, from the base layer, I tried to add as much texture as I could. I was trying to cover the surface and trying to leave as much more marks with the alcohol marker nib as I could. And on the opposite, of course, I was trying not to make that super smooth coverage for the base layer. I needed a lot of texture here, that's why I've started adding them right from the base layer. And now you can see that when the base layer is down, I start building volume and texture. As usually in my illustrations, I go from light to dark, that's why my base layer was the lightest, and now I'm grabbing slightly darker and darker colors and laying down those textures. I do go back to the lighter colors to make a little bit softer blends, but I try to make it really sparingly. My aim here just not to leave super harsh lines. That's why I still soften them a bit, but still preserve those cracked textures. My main approach to creating the dough texture is to make those irregular brush strokes, dots, and some subtle lines. And with the combination of correct color and volume, this will give the impression of that crumbly and cracked surface. For now, I am working only on a cookie texture and leaving those chocolate chips for a little bit later. At this stage, I am grabbing darker colors and building that volume and enhancing my cracks and crumbly textures. The color palette of the markers in this illustration is pretty simple. As the main color here on these cookies, I am using one of my most used color families of Copic alcohol markers. And it's E30's color family. It is the range of very beautiful golden ochre color shades. No pastry illustration or many desserts will go without those colors. It is time to build the correct shadows. And in this illustration I am using warm grays, and let me tell you why. At first, let's look at the light source. The light is coming from the right, and we can see that the lightest areas on the cookie stack are from the right, and also the cast shadow and the darkest areas are on the left. The next important part is the color palette of the object. The cookies on the reference picture are light yellowy beige, but I wanted to give them more appetizing look in my illustration and add to those cookie colors more of the golden shade. That's why I've picked not only yellowy ochre colors, but rather golden ochre and golden browns. Once we understand the color palette of the object, we can select the colors for the shadow. The shadow colors are not only the darker ones, they are also have to be more muted, which means the vibrancy of the color should be lower. So, following this logic, my shadow color will be the color of my cookie but darker and more muted. I have several variants of how I can make those shadow colors. First variant is to grab a muted and darker brown color. But I like to use the advantages of the medium that I am currently using. Alcohol markers are transparent or semi-transparent, and I can glaze and layer colors on top of each other. That's why I've decided to layer all of the volume at first, and then darkening and muting down the exact same colors in the shadowed areas. And I can make that with help of grays. Alcohol markers usually have a wide range of grays, so which one to pick in this case? One thing about shadows is that they should not only be darker and muted but also cooler in tone. So for the shadows we typically use cooler colors, and cool grays will be the obvious option. But I usually draw food and I like to preserve that appetizing look. So my artistic choice will be to layer warm grays. They will not only darken the surface and make the colors more muted, they will give the feeling of the shadow and preserving the appetizing look of the food. Plus, warm gray can look more organic with ochres and brown colors. The tricky thing with shadows is to give them the correct volume. The darkness of the shadow depends on the light condition and lightness or darkness of the object itself. I try not to go overboard with my shadows because I want to build all of the volume on the object so I can judge values better. And it's always easier to add volume to the shadow later if needed. And this is exactly what I'm doing here, enhancing cast shadows from the cookies on top of each other and darkening the cracks on the shadowed areas. And now I'm adding those soft highlights on the chocolate chips. Their palette consists of rich brown colors. They are much darker than the cookies. For their colors, I've picked mid-tone brown, dark brown, and deep brown. And as usually, I went from lighter to darker colors. So the base layer was with the mid-tone brown and then added volume with the darker colors. I wasn't trying to add a lot of detail or texture on those chocolate chips because they are a very nice accent and supportive element for the cookies. That's why my aim was to build the correct volume and give those soft highlights for more appetizing look. My favorite part of this whole illustration is the central chocolate chip on the top second cookie. I like it how it partially melted into the dough and partially shows its side to the light and catches that soft highlight. For the cast shadows, I am using neutral grays because I think for the illustration on the white background, this is the best option. Building shadows from the light to dark as well, starting with the lightest gray. Then grabbing darker colors and building volume until I'm satisfied. And of course, I am not forgetting the cast shadow from the chocolate chips that laying around the stack. And as a final touch, I am adding soft highlights and textures all over the cookies with the white colored pencil. My aim in this illustration was to practice sketching that crumbly and cracked surface. And I'm really satisfied how this one turned out. I like it how I managed to create that feel of an even surface. And it was achieved by layers of uneven strokes, chaotic brush moves, and lines for the cracks, and textures that were added with help of the white colored pencil. The combination of golden beige and golden brown, together with deep rich chocolate browns, turned out really great and appetizing. And this is the thing that we want to see in the food illustration. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And if you would like to draw with me real time, don't forget to check out the lesson on my Patreon page. The link is in the description box. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Bye for now.